Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are again, another podcast show. And this gentleman, when you see his face, no introduction whatsoever. But for those of you who can't see him, it's Glyn Hughes, previously with IATA and now the new Director General for TIACA. So Glyn, thank you so much, sir.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, and I'm looking forward to this.
Yep, likewise. And we've had a few sessions over the years, but firstly, congratulations, Glyn. Well done, and I think it's a perfect fit. So, fair play to you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, and I think the support I've received from the industry so far has just been overwhelming, and I think that really shows that the heart of what the industry is about, which is a community, and it's why you've been in this for 1 or 2 years, or a few more than that. And as you say, it's something that's in the blood. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, no, good man. Right, now, let me just ask you a quick question. So obviously, being an Irish Roman Catholic, we know what BC is and everything. So now you've had quite a substantial part of your life before CV, and now you're entering into life with CV. So just the difference and what that had, the effect that had, Glyn, irrespective of whether it's IATA, TIACA, or any of the other regulatory or representative bodies. I mean, it was just phenomenal, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at if you look at the world that we sit in today, and go back 14 months, nobody actually foresaw that we were going to be in this situation. Even the way that we've all used technology, the way that we work from home, the way that we actually value each other, the way that we actually value our health and that we consider about other people's health. So I think almost every aspect of society has been impacted. And of course, as an industry such as air cargo, which is really serving and supporting almost everything that goes on, from social events, sporting events, to industrial events, to social and humanitarian efforts, then nothing is the same. Nothing's going to be the same going forward.
Yeah, no, and I think people need to get their heads around that, because when it first started, people were talking about the new normal. It isn't going to be normal anymore. It's going to be different, or it's going to be a new way. But it's never going to be the new normal again, or back to normal. It's too much of a big change. Now, Glyn, one of the things that I think has been exceptional is the way governing bodies and regulator, the way everybody came together.
Yeah. And
how quickly they were able to introduce logical and effective changes to rules or guidelines. I mean, that was very impressive.
Yeah, it was, Chris. And, when you look at some of the real challenges that not just the world had, but air cargo had, I mean, the first thing was, countries switched off their airspace. They closed airports. They said, right, we're not having people coming in from anywhere at the height of the pandemic. But air cargo still needed to fly. Yep. So it was critical. And I'm one that's quite often, shall we say, challenging of international bodies and regulators, etc. But you're quite right. I think ICAO really stepped up and helped educate its various members and national authorities and civil aviation authorities about the need to keep air cargo operations coming in.
Yeah.
Customs authorities, World Customs Organization stepped up and helped its members in terms of adapting and adopting new procedures to accelerate processes through the airport. There were still quite a few challenges of getting employees to and from airports. Cargo staff were effective frontline critical staff. And in some countries, when you had curfews and lockdowns, it was difficult getting staff in. If you couldn't get staff in, you couldn't get planes offloaded and reloaded, etc. So you're absolutely right. It was a tremendous effort by everybody involved in the supply chain and those regulatory authorities that really create the right environment.
Yeah, and Glyn, it definitely more than anything, it showed that you can actually create an environment and a culture of enablers rather than inhibitors and administrative blockers. And that momentum now has got to be maintained, if not sped up, as we start to live with CV.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, and we look, and I'm sure we'll talk about digitalization in more detail. But that was one area, just something as simple as, I'm holding a pen.
Yeah.
You can't see this, but I'm holding a pen. One of the challenges that we had at the very beginning is that people did not want to share pens. So having to go in and sign for documents and all the rest of it, it started people to help think about doing things in a far more, not just a fast and effective and efficient manner, but less human interaction, such as document sharing, etc. So, you're right, that momentum helped people think through the problems that needed to find new solutions during the pandemic. We need to keep that same spirit and momentum going forward. It's critical for all areas because, as you say, this industry has always lived with change. That's one thing. If people say, what's the great differentiator about the air cargo industry, and saying it's its ability to react to the changing world that it serves. And as you say, the world has changed. Every aspect of the world has changed. Yep. That momentum and that acceleration of embracing that change and reacting and creating new solutions must be maintained. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, 100%. And now you mentioned there about not wanting to share a pen, but something, and we've spoken about over the years, and had a little bit of humour, but also a little bit of debate. And with some of the old characters from years gone by, is the documents, Glyn. Yeah. Holy mother of Moses! If ever there's a time now, even if it's driven because of the sanitisation issue and the health issue, we should be getting rid of all this paperwork, the airway bill and everything. It's madness now. And some of the the blockers or the personal reasons as to why and the motivations as to the benefit, it's got to go, Glyn.
Yeah, Chris, I'm not going to do anything other than support and agree with you 1000% there. And I think the key is you probably won't find anybody anymore that says, no, we're fine as we were. That's gone. Nobody is saying that the world of paper is adequate. Before we had people saying, yes, technology would be good, but I have no problems with paper. That voice is now silent. So the world knows that it's going forward, and as you mentioned, my former employer IATA, I continue to watch with interest the EPS bill statistics just as a way of an indication. I think it's up to about 75-76% of all shipments, but we know that's just the basic level. That's not the end of the. It's not even the beginning of the end. It's not the. It's really the very, 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 very beginning, because what we need to do is across the board. It's got to go from the point of booking. It's got to go, it's not just paper, it's also telephone. We've got to get rid of some of the inefficient processes. We've got to rely on that data, the benefits that we can all derive from using data in a much more effective manner. So I think that forward, we will see acceleration of that as well. And I also think that the pace of technological enhancement or advancement is also going to accelerate. 5G is around, it's getting more and more prevalent in mobile communication. So I think you'll find a lot more transactional processes will be handled on smartphones or smaller devices, which means people in the warehouse will be far more connected, people on the ramp. So I think you'll find that the industry will be much more connected and much more digitally driven.
Yeah, no, and long overdue as well, Glyn. But the docs, and like I said, the motivations for people still wanting to have hard documents, that's something that needs to be addressed and addressed urgently. Now, the business itself, and again, things that we've been speaking about, and in your old role, it was about promoting, the supply chain and air cargo and the industry and getting it higher profile. Well, goodness me, I mean, it's never had a better platform than now. There are people who are appreciating more about the business and the industry than ever before, and the industries and the businesses that evolve around everything to do with that airplane landing or taking off. It's phenomenal. And even government officials and some of the ministers, even though they themselves clearly don't understand the ins and outs, they're trying to look as if they do as well. So it's a positive thing. Now, how do you see that momentum growing, and where do you think we should be focusing on that to make sure it becomes better and better, and we start to bring, new generations, youngsters, good bright minds into the industry?
Great question. There's really three aspects. If you look at how the role of air cargo was more visible last year, and I'm going to focus really on three parts. First of all, in the CEO offices of the combination carriers. Obviously, the fully dedicated cargo carriers, there was no question, their shareholders, their ownership, their management, they knew the product was always high value. Combination carriers with 50, 60, 70, 80% reduction in international passenger traffic last year. The aviation industry was burning through cash at an incredible rate. I mean, the industry was making a loss of about $350 million per day, you know, aggregating to an $84 billion loss for the year. Yet air cargo was still generating cash. And in many cases, it was actually generating more cash than it had in previous years. So I think there was a renewed, I mean, the CEOs were always aware of the cargo product, but as an industry, it was around 10, 12%. So it was a nice contributor, but it was exactly that, a nice contributor. You know, the revenue for the industry for 2020 are going to be about, when the numbers get reviewed, about 35, 36% of total industry revenue. Let's say at least a third.
Yeah.
That's a huge significance. And for an industry that was earning through cash, in many cases, it was the difference between continuing to pay some of the operation, you know, the overheads that needed to be paid, versus sitting back and saying we've got no cash coming in. So a renewed recognition at the CEO level and the senior C-suite within the airlines, I think, was one. The second is within the media. You know, the air cargo, we've always benefited from the fact that the air cargo trade media was probably the most knowledgeable and the most sophisticated of any of the industries that I've been aware of. You know, the journalists they knew how to operate this industry inside out. So they knew the right questions, they knew what to cover. So they were always a very engaged, educated media. But the mainstream media, those that we didn't normally involve within the discussions, i.e. events and other stuff, they weren't really knew what air cargo was about.
Yeah.
You know, they thought it was about just delivering special documents when you needed it, or if or iPhone hadn't released, then it was just moving big things around. But if you look at how much mainstream media, whether or not CNN, BBC, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, all of the real global media in almost every country, RTE, you know, France 24, I mean, I could go through the whole list. They had an increased, and in fact, I would say an increased, I would think it was an eye-opening exposure to what this great industry has been doing for 110 years. Yeah. You know, supporting the global economy, supporting societies, supporting humanitarian efforts. So I think the mainstream media has really been awoken to the fact that there is this wonderful industry, that this industry, the air cargo guys, and you know, you've been around it, we're not flag wavers. Nobody in the air cargo industry was saying, look at us, etc. Yeah. And then the third pillar, which is really society. You know, people didn't understand before what air cargo was about, but now it's something that the entire global population is aware of, because as the skies were quiet, as you heard, air cargo bringing in PPE, bringing in medications, bringing in vaccine now, bringing in the e-commerce, bringing in the fruit and vegetables that we couldn't get because the land borders have been closed or maritime had challenges, etc. And coming to your point about how we can leverage that. So I think we've got 3 very strong new areas of awareness, which will help then inspire and motivate that next generation of workforce, which you and I have spoken about for so long, and it's so critically important, because we know that the next generation, the new young leaders, they want to make a difference and want to make a change. Well, what industry is going to make more of a change than the air cargo industry? So you could say we're going to go into pharmaceutical research, absolutely wonderful area. You know, anything in the medical world is doing a tremendous job of helping society. We're right up there alongside. You know, if you think about air cargo traditionally helps support vaccination programs to save 2 million children's lives a year.
Yep.
Well, if you look at what it's done for PPE, sadly, there was a lot of loss of life, but that would have been much worse had the PPE not been moved around the world, had the medications not been moved around the world, had the ventilators and respirators not moved, and the same for the vaccines. So I think those are some tremendous stories that will help inspire that next generation to look at air cargo as a really positive influence on their lives and hopefully to join us.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, like I always used to say, anybody that sits on an aeroplane, you can see lots of people, it doesn't matter how many times I've been on a plane, they've still got a degree of excitement, and you know, they're looking forward to something, or it's something that's very important. But when you look out the window and you see all that activity, there's loads of different orbiting businesses that operate around that. And once somebody gets into it, no matter what their specialization is, that then becomes mobile, because every airport that you land does exactly the same, just in a different language.
Yeah.
So it gives people the opportunity to, to go anywhere if they've got a certain skill, which is so important. But something you said there, Glyn, about our industry, journalism and stuff. We were on a podcast, I can't remember now, a week or 2 weeks ago, and there was a lot of negativity about the results and about cargo, but it almost angered people in the industry, because so many of them, and to be fair to them, some of the people that I've read and looked at and listened to and stuff, they're exceptional professionals. And we mentioned Alex from Lodestar, Thelma from Air Cargo I, Reggie from Stat Times, and also Gavin Murray, and there's loads and loads more. But those guys, no matter what happens, no matter what pressures, what problems, what struggles, whatever, they always do a good job with either the news or the trends or what's happening or probing, or they're absolutely superb. They've done a great job.
I couldn't agree with you more. As I say, I think that's one of been, and as you know, in my previous role and my current role, I try and read as much as I can, because the media that we have, the great media that you've mentioned, and all of the others, they write about things which are important to the industry and important to the people that use this industry. So therefore, it's critical for us, for those of us that are involved in working through perhaps new solutions, etc. We need to use that as our eyes and our ears. So I think it's absolutely incredibly beneficial. You're right.
Yeah,
I fully agree.
Yeah, and I should have mentioned Will Walters as well, because if he hears me now, he'll say, "What about me? What about?" But they are, all of them. I mean, I've obviously missed out loads. They're absolutely superb, and we rely on them to keep everybody aware of what's going on. And long may it continue, which will be brilliant. Now, Glyn, people are talking about build back better, and I personally, I don't think that's correct for our side of the business. I think it's bring back better or bounce back better, because there's definitely going to be a bounce back, but it's about bringing things. Bringing back better. Now we've got the chance to get rid of all that legacy of waste and stop doing certain things. And even to a degree now, some of the organisations like IATA, when you were there, now TIACA, and many others, they've also had to practical size because of what's happening, because they've had to reduce their numbers. Now, do you not think now's also a chance that they sort of consolidate a lot more and collaborate? Obviously, we're talking about it, but consolidate, and instead of repeating things on each side or each organization, they could second or overlap or integrate for certain subject matter, so that each one of the organizations was getting the benefit, but with less resource, less cost, but a consistent outlook and overview.
Yeah, I mean, I think you whether or not you call it bounce back, rebuild, or whatever it is, the fact is nobody can move away from or lose sight of the fact that the industry is smaller today than it was last year. It will be smaller next year than it was last year. It'll be smaller the year after than it was last, or I would say last year in 2019.
Yeah.
So this industry has resized. It's resized because passenger numbers were forced to sit on the ground, or aircraft were forced to be, as it were, parked in the desert. Now, when somebody says, when will passenger numbers come back? Nobody really knows. Will they come back in the same number? Will the advent of the technology that we've got mean that those small short haul trips to get a face-to-face meeting with somebody are now replaced by Zoom? Will it mean that by the time the passenger numbers theoretically would come back, it's another generation of travelers who might have different views on whether or not they go on long haul destinations or short haul? The business world may have changed. We're all working from home. So is a business trip in future everybody coming from home to go into the office? Have we redefined what a business trip is, what a business meeting is? So, there are so many imponderables that the same process needs to be applied to the associations themselves. All the organizations have had to resize and have had to reevaluate what role that they will actually play in this new world.
Yeah.
And I think, one example, and we'll probably talk a little bit about Project Sunrays, but if you look at what TIACA did with Pharma.aero.
Yeah, brilliant.
And if you look at some of the stuff former employer IATA did in the last 6 months or during the COVID pandemic, working very closely with the COVAX facility and UNICEF and the World Food Programme and the Cool Chain Association, I think you'll find that and FIATA, a lot of the associations, you're quite right. In the past, we might have all sent one delegate to a particular industry meeting. So there might be a representative from every one of the associations. Or perhaps in future, we might actually, as you say, look, we all have the same view. as long as we all have the same perspective on something, that somebody's voice is the same as somebody else's voice. So why don't we actually do things more efficiently and saying, look, this is an area of somebody's expertise, and kind of work more collaboratively on that. So I do agree that I think going forward, we've all said, every industry association have said that the true answer to industry success is collaboration.
Yeah.
Well, we also then have to apply the same to the true answer for association success is collaboration.
Yeah.
Whether or not that's collaborating with its membership. And I think, again, coming back to the unique role of TIACA in terms of having representative members from the entire supply chain is quite unique. But of course, it's also then working very closely and effectively with all of our partner and sister organizations that are out there to create a more united and louder voice. I agree with you.
No, good. Yeah, 100%. So good for that. Now, and also it makes people feel that everybody is sharing in the same pressures, but also the same balances, and then the same successes. So I think it's a good thing to do. Now, you mentioned about digitization, Glyn, and obviously, again, what we've had in the last year or 18 months has probably been the equivalent to 10 years, including practices. So that's also a positive as a result of this. And now that the vaccines are starting to roll out and people are looking at things differently, you mentioned about the Sunrays project. I mean, that's absolutely superb, because organizations like yourselves now, like IATA, ICAO, etc., the clarity and the guidelines and the sort of the finalization of what you should do or what must be done or what can be done, that's what people now need to see. No more discussion, debate, or what ifs and too much alternatives. It just needs now simplicity and clarity to move forward in so many ways. So I think that's a great thing that's happened now.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely you're right. And I have to be honest, Chris, I should probably pay you a royalty, because you use alliteration quite a lot. And I've quite often recently said we need clarity, communication, and collaboration. I'm thinking, damn it, that's one of Chris's. You're absolutely right. And I think that going forward, when it comes to all of the improvements that the industry need to make, I think we're going to see some significant steps forward in the next 2 to 3 years for many reasons. Number one, as we just said, the passenger networks are not going to be fully resumed. We know that.
Yeah.
They're not going to fly the passenger planes with 25, 30% load factors. So the industry is going to have to continue to be innovative to get the cargo that moves around, whether or not it's vaccine or economic products. When economies reopen and restart, that will happen well in advance of long-haul passenger travel. So innovation is going to be required. The technological advancements are going to be needed because people will need industry efficiency and, as we've said, data and communication.
Yeah.
One thing that we know is that all of the special cargoes are the ones that are actually going to be growing. So whether or not that is vaccine now or fresh perishables or live animals or any of these very sensitive products, even I'll put e-commerce in that. Doesn't require special handling, but it requires transparent handling. Exactly, it's different, because the thing about e-commerce is invariably me, the consumer, or whoever, mostly it's my kid, mostly it's my daughter, the biggest e-commerce consumer, I'm sure, on the planet. And the minute she clicks buy, those are her goods, which is different. We're normally a B2B environment where we're moving stuff to go into traditional retail outlets before they're bought. So it's a business focus. But when it's an individual personal focus, the transparency needs to be there, because we're now moving somebody's goods, not a business good. So it's a different focus. So I think going forward, the role of technology is going to be accelerated. And as I say, I think we've got a very exciting time ahead of us for this industry in the next few years, for absolute certain.
Yeah. And also, Glyn, on that subject matter, it's so important now. All right, Amazon, we all use Amazon, and I mean, God bless them. What they've done is absolutely incredible. I wish I'd have put some money into it back in 2008 or 2009, but they've done an incredible job. But it can't just be Amazon. So our industry needs to communicate better together. They need to collaborate better. We're talking about this, but also use digital benefits better, so that they can all come together and offer a point-to-point service, instead of just the people that we assume are the ones who are going to take over our business and do everything. We mustn't let that happen. There has to be an alternative that makes sense.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And sorry, you mentioned a sore spot there, because with Amazon, and I forgive me for saying this is a slight divergence, I bought shares in Amazon at $20.
Oh,
My wife and I, when this was in 2002, I think it was.
oh.
Yeah, we sold them at 30. So
and you went, yes.
yeah, at that 50%, wow, what a great success. And every so often, if you just do a quick calculation, if you think what they would have been if we'd have kept until today, then you know, I'd be taking this interview with you from a desert island somewhere. I'd still be working, but I would be in a desert island. But you're absolutely right. And I think, you know, the other area which we haven't really touched upon, which was related to that needing to do things differently, is the fact that, you know, the industry, despite the dramatic turn down last year, or downturn in capacity, the industry carried nearly the same amount of cargo. It was less than 10% reduction of actual cargo carried versus the prior year, which is a phenomenal result considering the challenges. And with the continuance in terms of January looked very buoyant going through. Okay, we've got Chinese New Year, so things will slow down a little bit now. But by looking at a number of the forecast predictions, by the middle of this year, we'll be back up into new territory again in terms of on the growth spurt. So now what we're going to be looking at is actually transporting record levels of cargo volumes at a time where we've got the lowest number of aircraft in the skies for probably 3 or 4 years still. Facilities, because of airports, have had tremendously challenging times because, of course, the bulk of their revenue has been dried up with no passengers. So therefore, it's difficult for them to invest in new facilities. So we're going to need to see a renewed focus on efficient ground handling facilities to make sure that they can get the maximum benefits that they can to get the cargo through their facilities in, again, we talked about in the most effective fashion because of the high quality that needs to be focused on. So, you know, the industry has a lot, you know, there's been some positives coming out, but we also need to be aware of there's a lot of challenges going forward based on growth, increased expectations, challenging situation for capacity. So there are a number of challenges that we will have to tackle.
Yeah, 100%, Glyn. And again, that's a nice segue into something I was going to ask you, because these challenges, so, you know, build back, no, because it wasn't demolished. Bring back, yes. Bounce back, 100%. But we don't know how quick and how high that bounce is going to be. But the one thing, everybody at the moment is looking after their cash flow. They need to survive. There are certain people who are wondering, you know, if it goes beyond the next couple of months, they're going to have to stop service. Otherwise, they're definitely gone. Some will sadly go. And then, you know, certain voices in the industry would say anybody that was struggling going in shouldn't really survive. They should be allowed to go, so it allows other people to do things in a different way. So we won't get into that. But the one thing that's happening with that cash flow, and now obviously people on furlough, people being released, and like you said, you know, I call it practical sizing because it's no fault of anybody's. It's just the fact that if you reduce a number of aircraft, you have to reduce around everything that was, you know, supporting that aircraft. So practical size has been really big. Now, that's left people with lots of anxieties, lots of fears, lots of guilts. It's a very different world. And some of those people, just because they're next in the number or somebody looks to them because they've got something about them, they're now suddenly lead agents, foremen, supervisors, managers. Nobody's told them how to do it, or nobody's explained what should be expected and why and all of those things. Now, all of a sudden, and a lot of experience has left the business, there's now going to be this surge and so much additional pressures are going to be put on people. And also, where do you bring all those people from? So at the moment, you've been able to bring them over from passenger or catering or whatever, and a little bit of training. But when that bounce comes back, if it's something that most organizations won't want to miss out on, that's going to be a huge challenge that nobody's mitigated for.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, you know, this is one of the things we can learn a lot of lessons from history. We should always be inspired by history and motivated for the future.
Yeah.
But one lesson that every industrial change that's occurred since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is, with change brings the need for reskilling and retooling.
Yep.
And the employment, the resourcing pool that the industry has today do an excellent job, but the job they're going to need to do going forward is different from the job they've done in the past.
Yeah.
One perfect example. If you were on an interview with me 18 months ago, and you would have said, Glyn, what do you think the likelihood is of 2,000 passenger planes being used for cargo-only operations with cargo loaded under the passenger seats, in the overhead compartments, in the storage cabins, and maybe 250, 300 planes having the seats taken out? Modern, almost aircraft, brand new, almost the first flight they do, whip the seats out and stick some tracking racks on the floor, secure cargo with nets in the cabin.
Yep.
Who would have been a brave person to even ask the question? It would have been laughable. And then if you would have said, right, now, are the ground handlers, do they have procedures for loading? And let's take a 777-300 passenger aircraft, fully loaded with the seats. If you want to use every available space in that cabin, that's about 2,000 something boxes that go in through a door, a normal door. How do you do that? Yeah. And yet it happened. It happened, people innovated. They said, you know what, let's do this with some did human chains to get the boxes up the stairs, some used conveyors, some actually started creating quite some innovative roller rack, floor racks that they kind of roll out and use it to slide, like a water slide, whatever, to slide the cargo into place. Some were using one-way systems. You walk in, you walk up the aisle, you go at the end, you come out the other door, down the stairs, so that there was no passing boxes and stuff going in the wrong direction. So again, this just shows there's one phrase that really encapsulates what this industry is that they will find a solution for whatever the problem is. Yeah. And I think that just goes to show it. But it requires entrepreneurial people who will question norms, who will actually say, look, let's figure this out. We don't always have a handbook for every problem that arises. You're right, the industry has lost a lot of expertise. It happened after 9/11. There was a huge shakeout. The industry lost an awful lot of experts, etc. This has been another sad consequence. Some tremendous people. It's not personal. All organizations, my former employer, they had to shed staff, as did all major airlines or most companies, etc. So it's how the industry and the workforce actually then adapts to the change. And I don't like the phrase new normal, because this industry, nothing's ever been normal. I've been in it 37 years and every week is different from the previous week. The stuff that we moved around in my first week on the job isn't even produced anymore. So this industry, there is no such thing. A long-term forecast is next month. So absolutely there needs to be a lot of focus and refocus on what new skill sets will be needed going forward.
Yeah, no, 100%. And like, obviously you've got your cargo pulse and you do a feature on a regular basis, but this new type of leadership, or a different way of combining the leadership, or should we say enablers and supporters again. So you need leaders to enable the business, but you need supporters, being the employees, to appreciate why somebody else has to have that additional pressure or responsibility. So there does have to be a different type of training coming forward now, Glyn, because there's so much training in our industry, so much. And you're talking about interviews. I've done, recruitment drives and interviewing people all over the world. And sometimes they turn up with more certificates than I could imagine, and for so much different content. And then when you speak to them, you'd swear to God that they just got off a boat somewhere and they haven't even had any background at an airport whatsoever. So that credibility and focus now on what really matters, that concentration, I think that's something that needs to be brought into the training environment and the training business now moving forward, because people aren't going to have the luxury of all of the trainings that were on before. And obviously it has to be blended now. You've got to use a different set of options, whether it be online, Q&As, competency testing, interviews, lectures, podcasts, even, to let people see what are the best practices. So that is going to be a radical change.
Yeah, you're right. And, TIACA, we're an organization like many others. We have a training portfolio, which is predominantly a safety and supply chain course, which we do in collaboration with ICAO and SASI, our friends at SASI.
Yeah.
But that's had to move. You can't envisage classrooms. Well, certainly not last year. So it had to go online with virtual classrooms, with instructors in multiple time zones. And online training, it's a balance, because you've got to be able to impart new skills. So training programs have to be updated regularly, because to introduce a training program that is based on an industry of the 1980s doesn't help anybody. But equally as important, and in fact you could say more so in many cases, is that you cannot train all the skills that's necessary. You can give people the solid understanding of the framework, particularly when it comes to things like safety.
Yep.
You know, these are areas you do not compromise on. This is as it were almost the gateway to being able to do something. Is safety should never be compromised.
100%.
But we've got to, as you say, create that environment where the innovators, you know, and you know, we talked about carrying cargo in the overhead compartments. You know, there is a story, and I hope Ram won't mind me telling him this, but this is one of the very first stories that Des ever, you know, when he describing his great friend Ram, is how Ram used to meet all of his volume targets that he had in being an outstation, was because he would, you know, use every available inch on that aircraft. You know, and this is 25 years ago. So we say nothing's new in this industry, it's just has its time.
Yeah.
So that goes to show that if you have a need, you need to have the workforce that A, has the ability to actually think about finding the solution, but B, and you mentioned it a minute ago, they've got to be empowered. Because if you have a management structure, which, you know, some junior member of staff comes up and said, I've got a great idea that could make a process improvement. And if they're met with, when you've served your 20 years, then I'll talk to you, that doesn't help anybody. So we do need to have those receptive managers in place and those receptive leaders that actually encourage and nurture that innovative spirit, because that's really the success of the future of this industry, is creating the environment where the future generation workforce, again, who want to innovate, who want to challenge, who want to question, feel that they're actually in an environment that actually encourages that. And I think that's also where I'm pleased, is because the leaders in this industry, and I started in this industry, opening envelopes was my first job. And I've been so privileged that to meet with and work with and for so many people who kind of then gave me an opportunity. And we need to make sure that that continues, that people get given the opportunity.
Yeah. And also, Glyn, a different way of approaching things as well is there are going to be so many people now, and, you know, the term work-life balance, but it's not now. Now it's going to be life-work balance. And there's going to be so many people who realize how important it is to work for a good organization that cares about their employees, so that they can then care about the business and the profitability or the sustainability of that business, but that they know that at any point, if they choose to want to be considered for something different, that's the point that they can make that notice. But if they don't, and they're happy to be in that larger group of people who come to work, do a good job, nearly always there, and are happy to be there because they know that that allows them to do what they want to do outside of work and to sustain their ecosystem, that big group of people is the most important group of people for any company.
Yeah,
because everybody can't become the DG, everybody can't become the CEO, and everybody wouldn't want it because of the 24/7 on your phone, constantly having to do this, that, and the other. So you have to appreciate that group of people. And if they feel that a company cares about them and cares about their tomorrows, then that footfall is going to follow companies in the future that have got those sort of values.
Yeah, you're absolutely right again, Chris. And I think another thing you talk about post-COVID is the fact that the sense of community. You know, we define what is community. We're all communities now, but we're also part, and we recognize our part in the global community. Yeah. Because, you know, COVID impacted the entire planet to different degrees in different countries, and almost every country had a different way of addressing it. But one thing is without doubt, it impacted everybody, every community and every society. So going forward, that's not going to be forgotten. We're all part of a global community. Yeah. And I think that one of the other things that will come out of this, and you mentioned the word there, sustainable and sustainability, is I think that the renewed focus on industry sustainability, every industry sustainability, the UN sustainable goals, the 17 sustainability goals, I think will come into play much more. Yeah. And if you look at even things like helping countries address the economic generation and growth to help countries get out of, as it were, the poverty trap, air cargo has a leading role to play in helping products get from growing and developing nations to global consumers. So I think we have another renewed focus and recognition of the role that we play in our work community, in our private lives and our social lives, because I think we value a lot of things much more than we did perhaps 12 months ago. And our role in global society. So, you know, let's hope that some positives can come out, that we can actually recognize that truly as a society around the planet, we have to be integrated. We have to integrate economies to actually integrate communities. And once we're more integrated, it will help the focus on global peace and harmony, because societies will be reliant upon each other and not in conflict with each other.
Wouldn't that be great?
Air cargo has got a critical role in all of that.
No, I agree, Glyn. Now, we started at the beginning, we mentioned, or you mentioned, about Sunrays and about Pharma.aero. So to finish, I think it's good, because at last, and thank God for all the scientists and the incredible people that, you know, delivered these vaccines. It's incredible. But one of the things that happened at the beginning of that was the initial survey, which was echoing some of the negativity in all of the press media about, you know, would there be enough? How would we handle it? All this. Well, that brought to the attention of the world in a very short period of time that the transportation of pharmaceuticals isn't new to our business. And it's something that was being done very, very well, and people were doing things in the right way. And something, again, that we joked about many years ago, CEIV, you know, having that extra focus on top of GDP of a particular part of the industry and our industry. Everybody that did it, they must have been thinking, my goodness me, thank God we did. But the capabilities within the industry, and between the first survey and the second survey, showed that with that little bit of focus, you know, that confidence, the barometer went up several notches. Now with the guidelines, I mean, it's a very effective concept, but there's an awful lot of gaps around the world where that process from aircraft landing to getting it to a facility of whatever sort, and then maybe redistributed domestically or whatever, that temperature journey, you know, with as least amount of excursions as possible, and what each excursion means, that clarity now is still something that needs to be focused on, so that everybody benefits and there's no wastage or spoilage.
You're absolutely right. And in this industry, we've had a phrase which we've always said, point-to-point traffic, for example, point-to-point flights, point-to-point this. I'm going to use that, but in a different context, because now with vaccines, it's point of production to point of the needle.
Yeah.
You know, it's a much broader and longer supply chain. And it's not just about the supply, but it's about the supply and the disbursement.
Yeah.
Because it's no good getting 10 million vaccines into a country, as you say, arriving in wonderful condition, and then finding that there's no local infrastructure to be able to move them in the condition that it needs to be moved to the disbursement centers.
Yep.
Even if they're then moved locally, but if the disbursement center is given 10 million doses of a vaccine and it has a throughput of 1,000 doses a day, well, it's no good giving them 5 years worth of vaccine if you've then got other countries which are on a 3-year waiting list.
Exactly.
So it's again about global coordination. I think what the COVAX group is doing is tremendous. I think they've got about 190 countries that are coordinating. Some people assume that the COVAX was purely there for just the developing nations to support, but it's not. COVAX is actually also a mechanism for distribution as well, because they're working with UNICEF and World Food Programme and others who've got tremendous expertise in logistics and moving vaccines. For, you know, if you look at the Pan American Health Organization and UNICEF, they have tremendous global vaccination programs every year.
Yeah.
So, you know, by countries actually subscribing to that, it can help alleviate some of the blockages and problems, because they can give some guidance to countries. We as TIACA, with the guidelines and working with Pharma.aero, are always there available to help guide countries if they have particular concerns or questions about what they need to do to focus on for local distribution. Because there's one phrase here, you know, we're all, one of us is protected when we're all protected.
Correct.
And I think that's absolutely critical in this, is that, you know, it's not a case of, and congratulations to Israel, to the US, to the UK. You know, UK, interestingly enough, didn't have a particularly effective program for testing, a lot of criticism, but the vaccination program, it's now what, 22-25% of the population. All of the very seniors have been done. And I know you're a young man, so it's going to be a while, Chris, before you come up in the priority level. But But
You got that one in, Glyn. I'll let you get away with that.
but you know, it's still no kind, you know, but it's still then a case of no, we need to help protect everybody. So there is a global responsibility, and I think the challenges with vaccines, the guidelines are excellent and they help steer and give a lot of consideration, but there's still an awful lot more work to do. Yeah. Because if you look at the traditional vaccine programs that UNICEF and the Pan American Health Organization, just as two bodies that I've been speaking to quite closely, almost 90% of the vaccine they moved was in bellies of passenger aircraft.
Yep.
The bellies of those passenger aircraft are not flying to the destinations which will need the vaccine. Yep. So new solutions need to be required. You know, if you look at the first two vaccines that came out, had very specific handling requirements, weren't very conducive of moving to areas with challenging infrastructure. But AstraZeneca, Sinopharma, you know, the Sputnik 5, the one that's being produced in India by the Serum Institute, a lot of these are a little bit more easily transported, but capacity and in-country logistics is another area that needs to be focused on to be successful.
Yeah, no, I think everybody will be getting together, you know, whether it's the last milers or private aviation or everything. Yeah. Ferries, there's so much that needs to be done, you know, when you look at the rest of the world. And like you said, Glyn, you know, to finish with, we're all safe only when we're all safe. And that will bring us to be able to explore and to look at a different world, because it's going to be a different world, but only when that's in place. And that will only happen if we all care. And I think on that word, my friend, I know how much you care about this industry and everything that you deal with. So congratulations again on the new position. Good luck to what you and everybody's doing, and hope to see you soon. And thank you very much for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure to chat to you. It could go on for hours, but I'm sure your listeners wouldn't want to listen to us go on for hours. So this has been a pleasure. Thank you, my friend.